the Auckland Climate Grant Pilot. We have Fran and Lucy.
Tēnā koutou katoa, malo e leile, greetings to you all. Ko Lucy Hookoff tōku inga, hei kai whakahere mō Te Ropu Community Climate Action. I'm the Community Climate Action Team Manager, and I'll hand over to Fran to briefly introduce herself.
Ko Fran Haken-Takuingoa, low carbon specialist.
Oh, you need to hit the...
Sorry, ko Fran Haken-Takuingoa, low carbon specialist in the Community Climate Action Team.
Great, and I just wanted to acknowledge Fran. I'm sure you all know her from her advice on grants in the past, but what we'll be presenting today is really her work over the last 9 months. So, yeah, as you probably remember, the Auckland Climate Grant was funded through the Climate Investment Package in the recovery budget. So in year one, we chose to distribute that additional funding through the Regional Environment and Natural Heritage Grant Scheme. And that went well. We were able to distribute over 350,000 to 14 new climate projects. But during that, the last year, we've developed a proposal for a new Auckland Climate Grant. And if you go to the next slide. Oh, sorry. So we will have 400,000 to distribute through the grant in 22-23, and that will increase gradually over future financial years. The purpose of the grant, there are 3 key purposes. One is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions through community-based action, build community resilience to climate change impacts, and support Māori-led responses to climate change. And obviously, given the value of the grant, it's aimed more at those community and household level responses rather than major infrastructure or that kind of initiative. So for the pilot year, emissions reduction is the top priority. We're expecting approximately 70% of grants to be allocated to that. And of course, with a less going to resilience, and of course, Māori-led projects could be either focused on reducing emissions or supporting resilience. And in terms of the priority areas for the grant funding in 22-23, the areas we've identified are Māori-led action, and so that's obviously part of the partnership between Council and Mana Whenua under Te Tiriti. We also are aware that in the past, from climate and sustainability grants at the regional and local level, less of those have gone to Māori-led projects than we would like, so we're trying to improve that. The other priorities are transport, because it is the highest source of emissions in Auckland, and there's a lot of community enthusiasm and active groups working in that area. Food has also been identified as a priority because it's the second highest source of consumption emissions, so the emissions that people can influence through their day-to-day choices. And there's also a lot of community enthusiasm in that area, and among a diverse range of communities in Auckland. And then also energy, the energy we use in our homes and businesses. And we have some great projects running now which are bringing a lot of co-benefits in terms of helping low-income Aucklanders to warm up their homes as well as save emissions. And so we've taken a little bit of a different approach with this grant than some of the other regional grants. We want to split the grant into 2 categories. There'll be response grants. So these are lower value grants that we want to have a simplified application process for and a quicker turnaround in decision making. And that application process might involve people being able to make a video or even verbal application, and then we'll work with them to support them to fill in the form. And part of what we're trying to do with that is to reach some of those groups that we know have found council grant processes hard to access in the past. So groups such as Youth, Pacifica, Marae and Rangatahi Māori. And obviously we have other initiatives that are underway. For example, our Resilient Marae project and Mā Tātahi Taiao, our Rangatahi Māori project. And so the the staff working on those projects will be working quite closely with these underserved groups to help them apply and make it easier for them to put forward successful grant applications. And so for those smaller grants, we will have multiple grant rounds a year, and the decision making would be delegated to the General Manager of Environmental Services. And one of the benefits of that delegation is that we can turn around the decision making much faster. For the strategic grants, that would be the more kind of standard grants process that you see for the REN and the Waste Minimisation Innovation Fund, higher value grants that we would be aiming for significant innovation or impact. Those grants could potentially be multi-year funding for up to 3 years, and the decision making for those grants, we've recommended that it be delegated to the General Manager of Environmental Services in this year. That's largely because of the timing of when the grant will be adopted and the election, and it would be brought to a committee of council in future years. And so the funding round dates for the response grants, like I mentioned, there'll be multiple funding rounds. It will be a shorter application time and a quicker turnaround process. And then for the strategic grants, we'd have one round that will open on the 26th of September and close at the end of October, and we would aim to have the grants awarded by Christmas, which I think one of the big benefits of that approach is that we last distributed climate and sustainability grants to the community in December 2021, so there won't, I guess, be any gap in that support from a community perspective. So that's the outline of the grant, and happy to take any questions before you move to the decision.
Thank you both, and thank you for the work done on this and also responding to our feedback around how we would like it to roll out in this year because of the tight time frame with the election and other things, but also the want for some more democratic oversight for the larger grants in the future. And I know it was not intentional to say lower value. I think you meant lower quantum because they'll all be very valued projects that come through the grant process, Lucy. But thank you both for the work on this. First question, Member Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the great presentation, some really good detail in there. I've got two partai if I can. One is how have Mātāwaka perspectives been taken into account in terms of consideration, please?
I think that, sorry, through the chair, that's a good question, Member Wilson. I think our engagement has been largely focused on mana whenua to this point. We did hold some workshops that were open to community stakeholders as well. Did any Mātāwaka groups attend those, Fran?
Not from my memory, no.
Mm. So I think...
Thank you. So, yeah, it's not reflected in the documentation, so some consideration would be good moving forward. My second question, if I can, I note the grant includes a Māori outcomes assessment criteria. How will these be considered in the recommendation process? And is there criteria that aids that process?
So for that Māori outcomes area, that would be assessed by our Māori specialists who are working in the community climate action team to, I guess, give us advice on how well grants are contributing to that, and then we would take that into account when we make the grant decisions. So, you know, as grants get a score against each of the criteria. Does that clarify your question?
Yes and no. So it'd be good to understand the criteria that's utilised in the process and how the Māori outcomes assessment works, bearing in mind it may be that Mātāwaka hasn't been taken into consideration, which is sometimes the downside of INES, which doesn't contain membership. So I'm going to leave that there, and I'm sure the Secretariat will be happy to support in any way that you require to move forward. Thank you.
Through the chair, thank you, Member Wilson. It's a really good point about Mātā Waka engagement that we can keep in mind for future grant rounds, and also we have been meeting with the IMSB Secretariat about climate projects, and we definitely will touch base with them on this as well.
Thank you, Member Wilson. Great questions, and I think that this climate grant does need to reflect or work with Mātā Waka, considering the other more substantive funding come from the climate initiatives will likely be going to mana whenua marae, but there could also be the urban marae that are Mātā Waka that come forward for that other funding, but which will be connected to this. But thank you. There are no more questions. Could I have a mover? Deputy Chair, Coombe, and a seconder?
Happy to second, Mr. Chair.
Cool, that was Councillor Cooper. Thank you. Are there any comments on this one? Anyone online? No, just once again, thank you both and the team, and this is just another exciting part of the Climate Initiatives funding that will be helping out communities across Tāmaki Makaurau to help embed Te Tarakia Tāwhare across our city. So thank you very much. All those in favour?
Aye.
Anyone opposed?
Aye. Aye. Aye.
Anyone opposed? Cool, that was all in favour. Thank you. Thanks very much. Right.